Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back. I'm making a Hotline Miami style samurai game featuring an art style and a soundtrack inspired by retro anime classics like Samurai Champloo. Now let me show you what's new with the game this week. We have a sick new animation this week. Whenever you start a level, your character does a badass move where he pulls out his sword, and now he also does this badass move at the end of every level where he flicks the blood off of his sword and slides it back into his sheath. We've also started working on the first piece of environment art for the tutorial level, so I'm super excited about showing you some of that very soon. Kicking objects at enemies will now send them flying back a short distance, so it's now possible to kill enemies by knocking them into floor spikes. And I'm in the process of going through all of the levels in the game's first act and balancing their designs and difficulty. What you're seeing here is a balanced version of the game's third level, which features a flashbang item and enemies that dash at you. So this week, I wanted to rate for you guys my top 3 favorite recreational drugs. Coming in at number 3 is LSD, aka acid. Here's my best anecdote from dropping acid. I went out to a cottage with some friends of mine, kind of a cabin in the woods type of situation. It started off pretty good. We had a hot tub, just enjoying the day. I remember looking through the forest and my vision started to kind of shift back and forth and I could see all these different possible passageways through the forest. Later on, we were all hanging out inside in the basement of this cabin place and I was enjoying this huge painting of a deer staring you right in the face. I was also then later on laying on the ground. We had a projector that was displaying a bunch of trippy stars all over the ceiling, playing some music in the background. But then all of a sudden, at a certain moment, I could somehow just sense that the mood in the room had changed. And sure enough, I raised myself from the ground and looked over at the couch where everyone was sitting around. And it turned out that one of the guys that was there with us had never done something like this before and he was having a bad trip. Now I can relate to that. That's happened to me many times. In fact, honestly, I kind of fucking hate psychedelics. Every single time I do them, the first half is interesting and fun, and then I get to this middle point where I'm peaking, and I start to kind of just slowly feel like I'm losing my mind, and I just want to be normal again. Fortunately, his girlfriend was there to help take good care of him, so we got through it. But in that moment, I did start to think to myself, like, oh shit. What if this is one of those like cabin in the woods horror movie type situations now where we've all taken acid and we're all gonna go fucking crazy now and we just end up murdering each other and stabbing each other? That's not something you want to be thinking about when you're having an acid trip. From that point on, it was pretty shitty, but fortunately, by this point, I already had a lot of experience with psychedelics. I knew what to do. You just gotta tell yourself, it's a drug, I'm gonna come down, whatever, and you just gotta kind of ride the wave and let it go. So me and my buddy just huddled up on the couch and had some blankets over us, and we were both just muttering to ourselves, like, fucking acid, fucking assholes, fucking hate doing this goddamn drug. But that was the last of my experiences. After that, I decided I never wanted to do this shit again. Frankly, I was hesitant to even do acid on this trip in the first place, but I thought, what the hell, it's been a while, I guess I'll try it one more time. And nope, just ended up being the same shit all over again. And actually, the last time I did acid before that, I kept a journal where I was writing every hour how I was feeling about things. And I remember that the last thing I ever wrote in that journal during that trip was in all capital letters. I put, never do psychedelics again. So anyway, all in all, since the first half of doing acid is always interesting, but then the second half always sucks balls, I give acid a 5 out of 10. Speaking of psychedelics, coming in at number 2, we've got magic mushrooms. Now, the best story I have about taking shrooms was actually one of the first times I ever did it. You should understand the reason why I ever experimented with psychedelics in the first place is because I had a lot of interest in religion and spirituality, and I had read that experiences with psychedelics can be conducive to having certain kinds of spiritual and religious insights. So I decided when I went to do mushrooms for the first time that I'm not just going to take some average pussy dose. I wanted to have an earth-shattering experience. So I decided I would take about 5 grams or so. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, to give you some context here, a typical dose of a mushroom trip, you would probably take something like 3 or 3.5 grams. So I was going for something like 5, 6, maybe 7 tops. Now, here's the problem. When I went to weigh it out, I didn't actually have a good scale available to me. I had a scale that could only measure things in increments of 10 grams, so it was really hard to tell at a per gram rate what it was I was actually taking. And because I really badly wanted to have an epic experience, I would eat a little bit, and then I'd be like, oh, what if it wasn't enough? And then I would eat a little bit more. And I kept doing this because I had read that with mushrooms, your tolerance skyrockets as soon as you eat it. So you have to do whatever you're going to do all at once. You can't just like eat more later on. It's not going to do anything. So I keep eating and I'm like, what if it's not enough? What if it's not enough? And I eat more and more. And next thing I know, I realized that I had pretty much eaten the entire bag, which consisted of about 12 to 14 grams of mushrooms. Naturally, I looked down at the bag and I was like, oh shit, buddy. And I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna go to bed. So I quickly threw myself onto the bed, threw the blankets over me. I was like, nope, I'm just going to bed. Don't need to experience this. Yeah, it's fine. I'll just sleep it all off. Obviously not. An hour or so goes by and the room is shifting. I'm seeing colors flashing behind my eyelids and it's like, oh shit, here we go. I toss and turn out of my bed. I get out. In all honesty, I don't remember much about what happened in my bedroom. I remember leaving my bedroom and then for some reason I sat down at the top of my staircase and I had this weird urge to start spitting, even though I didn't actually have any saliva and I'm just sitting there at the top of my staircase going Then I went down to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and I felt like having a drink of milk. So I took the carton of milk, started chugging a little milk, and when I put the carton back on the shelf inside of the fridge, you know how in a movie when there's this kind of like slow-mo, like echoey type of sound, like that's what it sounded like when I put the milk carton back on the shelf. I closed the fridge door, I turned to my left, and to my left there was a giant person-sized mirror, and I saw my reflection in it, and I walked up to it, and it felt like some kind of other entity had taken over my face and was like,
are you ready for this?
Next thing I know, almost as if I didn't even have control over my legs, it brought me downstairs into my basement where I proceeded to collapse onto the floor, and for the next several hours, I experienced what I believe in psychedelic circles they call ego loss, where you forget any sense of who you are as a person. Never mind not knowing who I was. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know I was a human being anymore. I thought I was this like formless entity. I remember at one point I had the random urge to put my fist into my mouth, and when I did that, it felt like my entire arm just melded into my body because I was just this like formless something. I don't know. It's like that feeling, I guess, that people talk about of feeling one with the universe. However, I would not describe this as fun or pleasurable or enlightening. I thought that the entire universe had ended and I was experiencing the singularity that occurs before the Big Bang takes place or something like that. And that I was trapped in this forever because for some reason my consciousness had become trapped inside of it. Fortunately, several hours later at about 6 in the morning as the sun started to rise, I slowly started to come back to myself. I started to remember, oh yeah, my name is Matt. I work at a fast food restaurant, and so on. I looked around, realized, oh shit, I'm in my basement. I finally actually recognized where I am. And I was like, whew, all right, I survived that. I remember going back up to my bedroom. I opened the door. My computer chair was flipped upside down. My blankets from my bed were thrown all across the floor. I don't know what the hell happened there. I remember flipping the chair over, getting onto my computer, and first thing I did was I sent an email to a friend of mine being like, bro, I am so grateful and happy to be alive. I will never take life for granted ever again. I have often heard it said when I would be reading about psychedelic stuff in the past that what psychedelics really do is that we're constantly receiving all kinds of information from the outside world, but our brain naturally filters out most of it because it's junk and it's useless to us. And that taking a psychedelic actually breaks those filters down so that you just see everything about reality as it actually is. I don't know if that's actually true. I think it's just some kind of theory. But the conclusion I came to was that if that is true, I now understand why that filter exists. And I very much appreciate the delusions that our brain creates for us. I think that makes life a lot more awesome than the crazy shit I was experiencing on the floor of my basement. I took mushrooms a few other times outside of that as well, and every single time it was the same kind of experience I mentioned before. First half is kind of interesting, I can handle it, it's fun, whatever. Then you hit that peak and I start to feel, it's not like that singularity experience I mentioned, but every single time I would start to slowly feel like I would be losing my mind. I would get stuck in thinking about the same things over and over again. It's this really weird experience where you're not actually thinking about the same thing over and over again, but it feels like you are. And it's like no matter what you try to think about, it feels like you were somehow thinking about the same thing you were just thinking a second before, even though that's not literally true. You're actually thinking about something else, but it just feels like the same thing. I know that sounds crazy or weird or insane, but that's what it's like. And then it's just that for like 3 hours. So once again, magic mushrooms, I give you a 5 out of 10. And finally, number 1 on my list of top 3 recreational drugs is cannabis. I've had a long relationship with this drug in my life, and unlike with the psychedelics, I have almost certainly had far more enjoyable experiences with it than I ever had negative experiences. Unfortunately, probably due to me doing it too much, I have gotten to the point where it is no longer quite as fun for me. In general, I don't really experience much anxiety as a person, but smoking weed now does cause me anxiety. If I smoke too much of it, it causes me to experience something called derealization and depersonalization, which I didn't understand at the time, and I've only actually recently started to read about this and discover what it is, and it's actually pretty interesting. It turns out that your brain has this kind of defense mechanism where if you experience too much anxiety in a situation, it starts to make the world feel kind of surreal in order to help you disconnect from, I guess, the stress of the situation. However, I found this to be an extremely terrifying experience because it's kind of similar to the psychedelic thing I mentioned, where it feels like you're sort of losing your mind. The best way I can describe it is it's like you become an observer of your own body. I don't know if you've ever seen the horror movie Get Out, where when the hypnotist like snaps his fingers, the main character guy, he kind of drifts back into the back of his mind, and it's like he's trapped inside of his own head and he has to just like watch what his body is doing. That's basically what it feels like. I don't know of a better way of describing it. But what about the bright side? Well, I have so many memories growing up about times of getting high with buddies of mine. And you know what the funny thing was about smoking weed for me growing up was it triggered almost a childlike part of my imagination. I remember one time we went into a forest, me and a few buddies of mine, and we came across this big king chair that somebody had carved out of one of the trees. And then one of my buddies got up on the throne, and all of us stoned out of our minds, we started to perform a knight ceremony where we would like kneel down in front of him and he would knight and christen each one of us. I remember another time, similarly, we were also in a big field with really tall grass, and there was this huge hill that goes up towards the forest. We started to pretend that we were in the middle of World War I or something, and so when we were charging up the hill, we were like, "Take cover!" And when we got to the top of the hill, we're all just like, "Oh bro, that was like so realistic." Perhaps the most interesting thing, unlike with the psychedelics, which as I mentioned, I had been interested not only in those, but also even in weed, precisely because of my religious, spiritual, philosophical reasons, weed was the only one that actually did lead to profound insights that I had in my life. In fact, I have 2 distinct spiritual or profoundly insightful moments that I had in my life that drastically changed not only my view of the world, but in very realistic and practical ways, my direction in life and what I actually wanted to do with my life. And I don't think it's that I couldn't have made these same insights without having been high, but I can't help but wonder if I would have made those insights if I wasn't high. This is one of those things where there's no way to know for sure, but definitely when I would be in that state of mind, it would often cause me to pause and become extremely introspective. My weed use was almost paradoxical because so many times I would have these profound moments of insight, and oftentimes I would be confronting scary or difficult memories that I had from my life, and I would gain insights because of them. And yet at the same time, I also often use it as a crutch to escape from reality or to feel better about things. And it was weird how it acted that way. Unfortunately, in the long term, as I've mentioned, it did create some anxiety problems that I started to experience almost always only when I would smoke weed. And there were definitely periods of my life where I feel like it probably contributed to a lot of laziness or complacency on my part. And it's probably the only bad habit I've ever had in my life that I had a genuine addiction to. Oh, and of course, how could I forget, back in the day in Canada, it was illegal still, so I got busted by the cops many times for possession. So taking into consideration all the good times and the positive things that I could take away from my bad habit with weed, and contrasting it with the bad times and the horrifying derealization experiences that I had with it later on, when it comes to cannabis, I'm gonna have to go with a 6 out of 10. Now, having said all that, my personal advice to young people would be to not do what I did. I try to live my life in such a way that I don't regret anything, but I nonetheless think that I can still say that that doesn't mean that everything I did was a good idea or something that anyone else should do. One of the things that I really hated about that period of my life and growing up was how fucking stupid I thought the adults around me were. You see, I think one of the things that was really lacking in my life at the time that would have helped me to have perhaps made better decisions about these kinds of things would have been having an adult around who wasn't full of shit. I found that there were basically two kinds of adults around me when I was growing up. There was the ones who were total prudes, who had never done any stuff like this in their own youth, and they didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. So all they knew was the same kind of propaganda that you would hear from the police or from anywhere else, saying that if you ever even so much as smoke a joint, your whole life is going to be completely ruined. And then the other kind of adult was the kind that actually had these kinds of experiences when they were younger as well. They knew about it. They knew it wasn't actually that big of a deal. It's, for some people, a part of growing up. And yet, they would also bullshit you. They would pretend like they didn't do these kinds of things, or they would also try to scare you by telling you all kinds of stuff. Now, I understand the logic there is probably that they want to discourage you from doing these things, but the reality is that being more honest and truthful, I think, would have been much more helpful to me in making smarter decisions about my own life. Because at that age, and especially nowadays with how much access kids have to the internet, even more than I did when I was a kid, you just know better. When an adult tells you about all this horrifying shit that's going to happen if you ever experiment with this drug or that drug, you know they're lying. You know they're full of shit, and if you don't know right away, you're going to eventually realize it. And then once you realize it, then you think to yourself, okay, well, they don't know what they're talking about and they're lying to me about this shit. Well, what else are they lying about? So then you don't really trust them anymore. You don't really want to listen to anything that they have to say. And then you have to go and figure it out on your own. And because you're going and figuring it out on your own, you might end up actually doing something stupid and making some mistakes. That while almost every adult in my life was feeding me this bullshit and I knew they were all full of shit, there was only 2 times I could remember and that I could think of where an adult was kind of more realistic with me. Where they were like, yeah, you know, your life probably won't be ruined because you smoke a joint once in a while, but consider how it can make you a lazier person. There's the possibility that you could become dependent on something like that for feeling better about yourself. Or even just consider that, yeah, okay, it's probably not a big deal if you do that once in a while, but you're really young, your brain is still developing. It might be a good idea to at least just wait until you're an adult or in college before you screw around with that if you want to, and you'll be more responsible and safe about it, and so on. And the only 2 times I ever had an adult speak to me like that in my life were the only times that their words actually stuck out to me and really made me pause and reconsider whether or not what I was doing was a smart move. But ultimately it didn't matter. 2 good pieces of advice in a sea of bullshit coming from all directions from the adults around me wasn't enough to change my mind. And in general, I think that when it comes to dealing with young people, children, teenagers, we do a great disservice to them by trying to lie to them about how things actually are or what reality is really like. And it goes in both directions, not only when it comes to trying to scare them, but also when we lie to them about the positive parts of the world. Which brings me to my next, final, most important point. The myth of Santa Claus. I know I'm a little late on this because of the season, but I think the first real seed of distrust is sown when parents tell their little kids that Santa Claus is real. Why do we do that? What is the purpose of that? Kids are smarter than that. They can tell the difference between fantasy and imagination and what is actually reality. And I think there's no reason to pretend as if it's literally real. You can tell them, yeah, okay, Santa Claus doesn't really exist except in our imagination. It's something we do for fun, and you can play along with that, and it'll still be great. Instead, you tell them that it's actually real, and then the first experience they have in their life of finding out that adults are full of shit is when they find out that you lied to them about Santa Claus. And then imagine how they'll be thinking about this. Hold on. Not only are my parents and adults in general willing to lie to us, they're willing to lie over some stupid fantasy story that there is no good reason to even lie about in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that's traumatic or anything, but that is the first reason you give them in their life to start to suspect you of bullshit. So I encourage all of you to lend some support and join my new organization over at www.savethechildrenfromthesantalie.com. Now, I have sat down and thought about if I have my own kids in the future and I tell them about how Santa Claus is a lie, I will also have to explain to them that they still shouldn't go around to their friends and tell them that Santa Claus isn't real, because their friends will probably still get mad at them, and also they might get bullied. I also imagine that my kid might ask me, why do my friends' parents lie to them about Santa Claus? And I will have to say, because your friends' parents are a couple of lying sacks of shit, whereas I am a man of virtue and honesty. Well, that's it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more updates on the Samurai game, and I'll catch you all here again next week. Peace.